Hello, everybody. Happy Tuesday afternoon. Hope yours is going well. We've got another Seahawks video to get to today, but first, we just hit 3,010 subscribers to the YouTube channel. I want to give a shout out to all the subscribers, and special tip of the cap goes to the channel members, including new Elite channel member TlVlO and returning Elite channel members Brendon, Mikel, Scott, Todd, Hasher for MVP, VGK Tiger 75, Ryguy, Salacious, Crumb, Brendon Nelson's Haircut, ItsHoof, and the Reno. All right, so as I said in a couple of recent videos and a couple of recent streams, the Seahawks are probably done with free agency. But as we all know, probably does not mean definitely. And it would be fair to point out that quite a few current NFL free agents have expressed some interest and indicated there might even be some mutual interest in coming to Seattle. I think that if you're paying attention to the rumor mill lately, you will have heard the Seahawks linked to many players who still have not found a home. So I decided to take this video to go over some of the guys the Seahawks could still get before the draft in a month. And while I'm soon going to be pivoting this channel to focus pretty much exclusively on the draft, I do think it's worth taking at least one video to discuss the guys we could still get. And obviously money is a concern. I've already kind of gone over why I feel like we have pushed our cap as far as it's going to be pushed without some painful things starting to happen if we continue to spend money. But that doesn't mean this team won't be willing to take on those painful things. We can abuse the void years. We can trade some players. We could cut some players. We could restructure a player like Bobby Wagner, who I don't think we want to restructure. It's on the table. So before we fully pivot into draft mode, let's take a look at some guys that the Seahawks could consider entering the third wave of free agency. All right, so we're going to lead off with the position of wide receiver, because I think wide receiver is one position a lot of people feel like we still need help at, and this is obviously understandable. It's a position that we will need help at most definitely if we choose to trade Lockett, which I still think is on the table. But even if we don't trade Lockett, a lot of people think we still need help here, and I cannot help but suspect that they might be onto something. So let's go to the free agency page for wide receivers, scroll through the guys who have been signed, and take a look at who is still left on the market. So there are a few appealing names here. I think the first one would probably be Golden Tate. We know there is some baggage here from the Russell Wilson Golden Tate rumors when he was on the team many years ago, but we don't know the whole story there. We don't know what actually happened. We have our suspicions, but we don't have anything concrete. So for all we know, Golden Tate and Russell Wilson would be totally cool with each other. And look, Golden Tate's skill set in this offense is a pretty good fit. Golden Tate is a great yard after the catch player, and that's exactly what I think Shane Waldron is prioritizing when looking at receivers. More on that in a few days. But Golden Tate is definitely an interesting talent. He would probably only cost a few $1,000,000 at this point. Marquise Goodwin is somebody who I really like for his speed. I don't know how well he fits in the Shane Waldron offense, but I've always liked Marquise Goodwin. So he's somebody I would at least consider. Antonio Brown is obviously kind of the white whale of the remaining free agents, I think. If there's any remaining free agent who I think is really a potential X factor to this team going from one of the best teams to the best team, it might be AB. Obviously, there's a lot of hoops you have to jump through with regard to being in a mental state where you think we need Antonio Brown, but it is something that this team, I think, should at least consider. He's an outside receiver, meaning he would fit in well. He's good after the catch, which I think makes him fit in well with what Shane Waldron would like to do. So AB is also on the list. There are probably a couple other names here you could go over. Like, I like Byrd, but he's certainly more of a slot receiver, which we already have right now. And maybe Dede Westbrook. I've always kind of been a big fan of Dede Westbrook. We could bring back Malik Turner, I guess. I don't really know why that would be that appealing. but there are quite a few decent receivers still in free agency that the Seahawks could bring in if they so chose to. Oh, it's our old friend Amara Darboh. He's still out there. Sure. All right. So that's wide receivers. Let's move on. Let's take a look at the interior offensive line because, as I've covered, the one area on this team that I feel like we could stand to improve a little bit in on the offensive line would be the interior. We could improve our depth. We could improve, especially at center. We might even need to improve just at center, period. So there are two guys that I'm going to cover here real quick. If you scroll through the centers who have already been picked up, the interior offensive linemen who have already been picked up, you can get down to one particular name that I think a lot of Seahawks fans have in mind. It's Austin Blythe. On Spotrac, he's listed as a guard, but we all know that Blythe is capable of playing three different offensive line positions. He can play both guard spots and he can play center. And he's only 29 years old. He's still relatively young. And he was pretty solid last year for the Rams. So you pick him up, you have a guy who has familiarity with the Shane Waldron offense, which is a positive. You have a guy who could immediately compete with and maybe take the starting job from Ethan Posick and possibly bump Posick to the backup spot. And that's valuable because, like I've said before, Posick would be an excellent backup center, but I can understand the trepidation behind making him the starting center. So Austin Blythe would be the one name on this list that I would consider bringing in because of his flexibility. At worst, you're getting a guy who can be a good backup at three spots. And then if you jump over to this page here and the center list, you can scroll down a little bit and you can get to the one big name remaining here, Austin Reiter, formerly of the Chiefs. I would still consider bringing him in at this point. I think it's safe to say the market was not there for him. He was expected to get 10 mil plus a year. It doesn't seem like that's going to happen. He might take a one-year prove-it deal. And if he does that, then I think Reiter needs to be at least a consideration for the Seahawks. And I'm not sure how good Reiter really is. He obviously played very well in Kansas City, but Kansas City utilizes a very potent offensive system that makes a lot of players look better than they actually are. But if we brought him in, there's very little doubt in my mind that he would probably beat out Posick for the starting job. And it would just make us better at center. It would improve our depth because Posick would move back to being a backup. And yeah, those are the two names I would consider in the interior offensive line, Austin Blythe and Austin Reiter. Everyone else I feel like is not going to be appreciably better than what we already have, so what's the point? But Austin Reiter and Austin Blythe would have a real good chance to become starters on this team. Okay, let's keep on moving. Let's jump to the defense here. Let's take a look at outside linebacker real quick. I've already gone over a little bit how this team needs to improve their depth at outside linebacker, and they need to give themselves a viable option if Cody Barton isn't working out, because it looks like Bruce Irvin's retired, so he's not an option, and it looks like KJ Wright, and more on this later when and if it happens, is going to sign with the Cowboys. So we need to bring in a viable backup at outside linebacker who is also good enough to fill in for Barton if Barton isn't cutting it, because that's on the table. So if you go down to the players who haven't been picked up yet, there are two names here that immediately jumped out to me. And there are probably a couple others that would work quite well too, but there are two guys here that I like. So the first one is Damian Wilson from the Chiefs. I think he would be a nice third linebacker, a nice three linebacker fill-in, and somebody who can back up Barton and quickly swoop in if Barton isn't cutting it. So Damian Wilson was a starter for most of his time in Kansas City. He was competent. He wasn't great, but at this point in free agency, he's obviously going to be quite cheap. And I think he would be exactly the kind of player that we're looking for. A backup with the potential to be a competent starter. And the other guy I kind of like is Aaron Lynch from Jacksonville. He's kind of in the same position for me as Eric Wilson. He's a capable player who can be a very good backup, which I do feel like we need because we don't know about Barton right now. And somebody who, if he has to fill in for Barton, as I was saying, is capable of being competent. So you could go through and find a couple other names here. Like obviously we have our old friend Michael Kendricks here. Eric Wilson from the Vikings would be workable. Anthony Chiquillo has played mostly in a 3-4 defense, but he might work. You could probably pick out a couple other guys in this list as well, but those are the guys who stood out to me as being solid fits. And finally, we're going to take a look at one position of clear and obvious need with a lot of different appealing options, and that is cornerback. So a lot of the good cornerbacks have been signed, but there are a lot of big names still left out there, and I've kind of poo-pooed some of these names in the past, but that doesn't mean they can be dismissed at this point, because at this point, a lot of these players are probably going to be cheaper than expected, and we don't need the greatest cornerbacks in the world. We need cornerbacks who are competent, because our pass rush should be that good. So you can go down the list and you can immediately pick out a lot of guys who might be a decent fit. A.J. Boye, experienced veteran who's had a pretty prolific NFL career. At this point in free agency, he's probably not going to get the big bucks he was thinking he was going to get, so Boye is on the list. Casey Hayward, he's old, which I don't love, but he's probably somebody who can still be competent. Obviously, Richard Sherman is an appealing name. A lot of people are still floating his name out there. At this point, I expect him to sign for a relatively cheap deal. If you could bring him way down to just a couple million a year, then I would at least be open to the possibility. You're going to have to talk him way down before I would consider bringing him in, but he's on the table. Steven Nelson, probably out of our price range at this point, even though he's still a free agent, but Steven Nelson's good. Josh Norman's kind of interesting if you think you can integrate him into the system, but he's even older than Sherman. Bashad Breeland is still available, and he's a guy that I actually really like, and I think he would fit in well with this defense. And then you have still Quinton Dunbar still floating around out here, and there have been some rumors that indicate that he's going to come back to Seattle before this is all said and done. And he's obviously not getting the money he was hoping he would, so I think that's on the table. And that's really about it. Maybe Dre Kirkpatrick, I guess. Maybe Jonathan Joseph if you don't care about age at all. But yeah, there are some good names still out there at the cornerback position, and it makes sense to me that the Seahawks might want to add one more veteran. We don't have to, but we can. And that's pretty much all I see right now. We could talk about backup quarterback for a minute, but why? And I'm going to go ahead and get out of here on that note because at this point, like I said, the money's getting tight and the roster is getting pretty finalized. So what do you guys think? Do any of the names I just mentioned interest you? Would you be willing to sacrifice something valuable in order to get one of these pieces? Would you get rid of Lockett to bring in AB and Dunbar? Would you get rid of Diggs to bring in AB? Would you restructure Wagner to bring in AB? Would you, or Blythe or Ryder? What do you guys think? Let me know what you think in the comments. I will see you guys later tonight in stream. Peace out. Go Hawks. Free agency's almost over, guys, but we might not be done. Keep the possibility open in your mind.